This is a Des Moines Historical Society presentation. Here's former Iowa State Fair Marketing Director Kathie Swift with a history of the Iowa State Fair.
Our fair system is a model for states around the country. From large to small and in between, fairs celebrate what is best about us all. I hope you all know that there are 103 county fairs in Iowa. I know that goes against our 99 counties. Each one of us has the chance to enter and be judged and enjoy the thrill of being chosen best. It doesn't get any better than that, really. According to the Iowa Palimpsest magazine, I want to ask all you historical people, do you know about the Palimpsest magazine? It started in 1853, and I think it's still published. Their website was really difficult to figure out. Bill?
It's called Annals of Iowa.
It's now called Annals of Iowa. Okay, check that out. I know you can go to the website, and I know that you can get a subscription to it. And it'll highlight certain, aspects of history, and beautifully done, beautifully done. They say that the very first fair in 1854 in Fairfield, Iowa, was an experiment, an attempt at bringing agriculture to a high state of perfection. That was said by one of the local officials. Interestingly, the Fairfield Ledger, the newspaper in southern Iowa, wrote on November 21st, 1853, "We beg leave to call attention of the people of the state to the foregoing call of the Jefferson County Agricultural Society. There is no free state in the Union, save Iowa, in which there is not a state agricultural society organized and in successful operation, and they have been recently organized in most of the southern states. They have been productive of a vast amount of good, and no one can estimate their influence. Is it not time for the farmers of Iowa to be aroused to the importance of such an organization in this state?" I think this calls for table pounding, don't you? "Shall we be laggards in the race of improvement? Shall the resources of other states be developed, their wealth increased, and their people elevated in the state of intellectual being, and ours stand still?" Well, I don't think anybody could pass up this siren call to get busy, and indeed, they did have the first Iowa State Fair in 1854. It was held October 25 through 27 in Fairfield, Iowa. Did you know that all? That it didn't start here? Okay. The fair was held on 6 acres of land surrounded by a 10-foot high fence. Anyone here from Fairfield or know it, the city? I've been there once. I got to see the marker. You go there?
My dad grew up there,
Oh, he did?
Actually lived across from where the big rock is now that marked the entry.
Oh, I love this.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you can tell us? Did he remember the first fair?
Yeah, he was there. He was actually the marketing director.
I kind of grew up with his father, so I can say these things. The fairgrounds cover what is currently 4th Street to 12th Street and Kirkwood to Grimes. The total cost to hold the fair was, surprise, $323. Public admission was 25 cents a person. Although $50 of counterfeit money was found in the collection over the 3 days, the fair still made $50. So it tells you that things can work. It's estimated that between 7,000 to 10,000 people attended this historic event. People arrived at the fair by horseback. They came in on carts pulled by oxen, and of course they walked on their way to come to the fair as well. And it's kind of interesting because certainly Fairfield was not set up to handle this load of extra people. So many people were taken in by residents of Fairfield into their houses, in their homes. So that's kind of a sweet thing to think about. I love this. On opening day, Attorney George C. Dixon gave an address that lasted 1 hour. And the governor was presented with a Denmark cheese that weighed 360 pounds. See? I don't think they report like they did in the palimpsest, you know? The fair gave farmers from across Iowa a chance to exchange farming methods and new ideas. It also allowed them to enter their machinery, their crops, their animals in competition. Mr. Fagan from Polk County won the first prize of $25 for the best 5 acres of Indian corn. His crop produced nearly 140 bushels per acre. The Stewarts of Lee County won first prize in the spring wheat competition. They had 66 bushels on 2 acres of wheat. Mr. Fulton won the fall wheat contest by producing 26 bushels per acre. 60 pens were built to hold the hogs and the sheep. The horses were kept in a barn that is still standing today. You know, I didn't check that absolutely, but at this time when this was written, it was there. Displays at the fair included some record-setting vegetables like they do now. There was a 69-pound squash and a 2-pound blood beet. There were also 83 different kinds of apples on display. A few of the farm implements, including plows, harrows, corn planters, reapers, threshing machines, and corn crushers. There are also many prison-made goods at the fair. In fact, the warden of the penitentiary won the prize for the best collection of agricultural implements. I think that's kind of interesting. You know, when I was working there, say 1978 it was, through 2004, a lot of our furniture in the offices had been built by the penitentiary workers. So I think that's kind of interesting to find it goes all the way back. There was a miscellaneous class of displays which include things like fringed mittens, paintings, fur hats, a collection of snakes, and even a brand new set of false teeth. You just don't know what things were enhanced at the fair. The main attraction at the fair was female equestrianism. They had 10 entrants, young women from the area. They competed for the prize of a gold hunting watch. Miss Belle Turner from Keokuk was the winner of the competition. She was described as the lady of the pink ribbon with elegant form, fine face, and soft blue eyes. The crowd did not agree with the judge's choice. Isn't it ever so? So the onlookers and supporters, they preferred 13-year-old Eliza Jane Hodge of Iowa City. She rode fearlessly and performed many tricks. The crowd decided that she should have her own prize, so they collected $165, which paid for 3 terms of tuition at the Fairfield Female Seminary School, and also paid for 1 term at the brand new college in Mount Pleasant. Sounds fair to me. The newspapers afterward had a lot to say. Afterwards, the Fairfield Ledger wrote, "The display of agriculture implements was very good. There was 1 reaper that combined with it an apparatus for raking, which struck our mind as being one of the greatest improvements on the grounds." And if you would just think about that a little bit, this is the very first fair, and you get an inkling of what the Iowa State Fair has meant to the development and enhancement of agriculture in the state. The Burlington Daily Telegraph was inclined to be critical, but it added generously, "Yet as a first effort, the managers are fairly entitled to commendation, with the understanding that they will do better next time." We like it. And let me tell you a little bit about it. It was 1854. The population of the state was 326,000. By far, the greater portion of the population lived in the eastern and southern sections of the state. Lee County headed the list of counties with a population of 27,273. Scott County ranked second with 21,000. In a great many counties of west and northwest Iowa, the population was so sparse that there was no attempt made to even count them. This was 20 years before the Westward Ho movement brought a tide of people in countless thousands of white-topped prairie schooners out of the east to cross the Mississippi and settle in what was called the Great American Desert. It does paint a picture, doesn't it? In the fall of 1855, following the second fair, President Claggett, he was president of the society, declared that the prosperity of the society will be greatly promoted by the permanent location of the place of holding the exhibition. The society must be permanently located in some central position, and permanent arrangements made for its accommodation. Sorry. As you can see, the fair in its beginnings was peripatetic and moved every now and then. For the years between the first two fairs in Fairfield and the next 25 or so were held in different counties, different cities in the state of Iowa. Muscatine, Oskaloosa, Iowa City, Dubuque, Burlington, Clinton, Keokuk, and Cedar Rapids. It doesn't take much thinking to think that if it's going to move around every year, you're not going to be able to put a lot of money into buildings or facilities. So that was why the forward-thinking organizers of the Agricultural Society began hoping that they could get a permanent location. In the years to come, the same idea was voiced on many occasions and by supporters courageous enough to put the future of the fair above other considerations. Finally, in 1879, the fair moved to Des Moines and remained there, although it took 6 years to persuade the legislature to appropriate the money necessary to buy a site. In the meantime, according to historian George Mills, who of you is familiar with George Mills? Everybody, isn't he wonderful? He really is. Lefty. He used to stop by the fair, and it was always a pleasure to talk with him and to hear what he had to share. George described that the fair took place on the west side of Des Moines. Now a residential site, it was in a city park named Browns Park, located between 38th Street on the east, 42nd Street on the west, Center Street on the north, and Grand Avenue on the south. Don't you have some information for us about, you grew up there, didn't you? Or your dad grew up there on that site?
No, that was in Fairfield.
Oh, I thought he was also there at this location.
We
Okay.
lived pretty close to there. But
Did you? Okay.
no, but
Well, because I mean, does this hold true that, you know, do you feel that can you figure out where this was? This location? Oh, tell us.
Where the churches in that area.
Which church?
I've got a whole article with me.
Oh my gosh, here he is. He has a whole article.
That was in the 1881 Des Moines Bushnell City Directory.
Oh my gosh.
Tells you about where it was, but I used to sell metal detectors and stuff, and we were always
Great.
looking for places to find old.
Yes.
So
Wow.
I did a tremendous amount of research on that site. I know where all of the pavilions were.
Okay.
We went ahead and actually build our own maps, etc. on it. Let me just quickly, this is a real short particular.
Okay.
The location at Browns Park, that was Farmer Brown owned a whole lot of land out there. Later, part of his land was made into Greenwood Park. It was one of the first.
Yes.
The state legislature allowed cities to issue bonds to build city parks, and our first parks were done in, I think, 9. Browns Park, Farmer Brown had everything finished and stuff out where Greenwood Park is now. And when Greenwood Park and Union Park were the first two parks that the city went ahead and bought land. But Browns Park, Farmer Brown had already had the trees cleared and little trails done out there for just picnics. He did it on his own for the city. So it was, the park started almost immediately. But anyway, let me read this thing very quickly. Iowa State Fairgrounds. This is from the 1881 Bushnell Des Moines City Directory at the Des Moines Library, when it was a library where we could find something.
Oh, okay.
I'm not a fan of the new library
Oh, I'll pass it on next time I talk to them.
with its dirt roof.
Okay.
Anyway. The location is at Browns Park, 1 mile west of the city limits. The Des Moines city limits ended up to what would be Martin Luther King or Harding Road. The cemetery, Woodland Cemetery, was outside the city limits at that level. The Des Moines North city limits was called North Avenue, which was later called, when Drake University started in 1881, it was changed to University. But get that in your mind, the north city limits was at University, the west city limits was at Martin Luther King. A very small thing at that particular level. Anyway, the location is at Browns Park, 1 mile west of the city limits. The Chicago Rock Island Pacific Railway runs frequent and regular trains to the grounds during the annual fair of the State Agricultural Society. These trains were really very small gauge trains, and they came up, some of the old tracks came up what would be Old Tonawanda Boulevard right now, and come up. The gate for this fairgrounds and stuff was right by where St. Augustine's Church is right now. There's a big ornamental, iron ornamental gate over the thing at that level. And it went clear through almost to where the freeway would be now as it goes in that direction. All of the, this is, and by the way, this is before there was an Ingersoll, by the way. Ingersoll didn't cut through at this particular point. And all those big oak trees around Plymouth Place and stuff this way, you should see the earlier seated Liberty coins and stuff, silver coins that we took with metal detectors out, because we did research to find out where people were, and where the people were, they dropped money. And that's what we were looking for as far as the metal detectors were concerned. Anyway, the location is extremely favorable for an exhibition of the products of the various departments of agriculture, and for a full attendance of farmers from every locality in the state. For the first time in the history of the State Agricultural Society, the fairgrounds are located at a point easily accessible from all directions, and the unprecedented attendance during the last two state fairs clearly indicates that the public appreciate the change. The grounds contain nearly 100 acres, including a natural lake covering 3.5 acres, which has an average depth of 16 feet. The grounds are artistically laid out with carriageways and walks in good order, and have ornamental entrance and exit gates, which are done out of ornamental steel. Trying to think of the name of the thing. The last state fair held here was the grandest exhibition of the products of the soil, agricultural implements, and manufactured products and fine stock ever held within our state, by the best men and the best minds in Iowa. Its affairs have been conducted with intelligence and prudence. Its annual volume of transactions has accomplished a great work of our resources to other states and countries. Its completion and preservation of the statistics of its collection of products in the field and its library are available. They had a racetrack, and the racetrack was pronounced by horsemen as to be the best west of Chicago. I know exactly where that racetrack was and where the stands were in the middle of the particular thing. If you're familiar with Des Moines, I was brought up in that area within a quarter mile of this. Ingersoll, take 38th Street north of Ingersoll towards Center, and you go back about 2 blocks, and this is where this racetrack was then, and they actually had a lake in the middle of the racetrack. That's this lake that they were talking about. And in fact, my wife's family's name is White, and the thing was later called White's Dry Lake Bed. Anyway, I didn't mean to usurp you, but that is from the Des Moines.
Well, I'm
city
glad to know
director
more
during
about that
time.
location.
Yeah.
It seems too bad that it lost out.
Well, then they moved. Then they moved where they're at.
Absolutely. And it turned out very successfully. Indeed. Really now, the comments now about finding this place for the location of the fair are really very, very lovely and sentimental. It was a very good place to finally be chosen by the committee of the board that was operating at the time. In 1885, the legislature appropriated money for the purchase of a permanent fair site, and that contained the proviso that residents and businesses in Des Moines had to raise an equal sum for improvements of the property. The board inspected several parcels of ground around Des Moines and finally decided to secure a location about 3 miles due east of the state capitol building. The chosen site was a farmstead owned by Calvin Thornton. Thornton had improved the farmstead with buildings, notable of which was his house and barn. Des Moines greeted the purchase of the fair site with a burst of enthusiasm. One historian of the time wrote, "There is doubtless no more beautiful site for the fair in the United States. Situated about 2 miles east of the state capitol, it rises from the plain in a beautiful and sightly eminence from which the country for miles to the west, northwest, and southwest stretches out before the view." Considerable credit for the purchase of the Thornton farm is due Isaac S. Brandt, a successful East Side Des Moines merchant and booster. Civic leaders in Des Moines initially failed to raise the $50,000 match required by the legislature. In 1885, Brandt, however, aggressively campaigned to get the money. He not only obtained $55,000 in pledges, he followed up and twisted enough arms so that more than $51,000 was also collected. Part of the money came from the railroad companies. You know, at one point they used to say that 90 trains a day brought people in from the state to the Iowa State Fair. The State Agricultural State Archives comment that the board rode in sleighs on January 20th, 1885 to view the Thornton farm, which was later purchased for the fairgrounds on June 19th. Included were 266 acres at $175 per acre and 3 acres at $1,000 each. On June 20th, the board moved to collect all donations from Polk County residents. Brandt was elated with the Thornton site. Tradition credits Brandt with the planning of Grand Avenue as well, the main street leading historically into the fairgrounds. This is a quote, "Standing on the highest point in the grounds, which he, Brandt, called Inspiration Point, he suggested a boulevard into the city 100 feet wide to be called Grand Avenue. That was the beginning of the present name of Grand Avenue, which runs today from the fairgrounds to the west limits of Des Moines and beyond. Someplace on the west side it became Greenwood, and from the river east to 18th it was known as Keokuk Road." I think those are kind of interesting ideas for that beautiful street now, which we know as one long, vast, beautiful conveyance, and to see how it used to be known. The Fair Board met in session the day after voting to purchase the Thornton farm. In 1885, there are not many working models to serve as patterns for a state fairgrounds. The board decided to send its president, vice president, and an architect or engineer to make an inspection tour of all those other fairs, remember, that we heard about. And so we don't really know if they ever made that trip, that review trip. They say the minutes remain silent about the proposed tour. But perhaps it remained unfounded and board officers balked at private sponsorship. There were the architects who first dealt with that, and which I'm not going to get into great now, but they had a lot of interest and a lot of hope for these fairgrounds to which, to make sure that they were going to be the grand and glorious location that everyone had hoped for. It was a beautiful site for what has become probably the most famous state fair in the world, and I do mean that exactly. If you think about the movie State Fair, of which there have been 3 versions, and if you think about the Broadway show, and you think about the movie, you know that people know Iowa State Fair. And it's wonderful that it has a home that befits its stature. The fair's development can be roughly divided into 3 periods: 1854 to 1900, reflecting its cattle show beginnings, when farm folk were few and simple, and farmers battled crop diseases they did not understand. 1900 to World War II, the years when the application of scientific principles and modern technology created the tools that eventually would allow one farm family to feed 20 others. And World War II, now to the present, a period of high technology food production when farming and related services coalesced into a giant agricultural industry. It's also something to be at the fair, particularly when there are so many missions to the fair from countries around the world to exactly come and see what makes Iowa and her agricultural heritage so important in this time, in this era, when the numbers of peoples to be fed is greater and greater. And they do come and they do praise the Iowa State Fair. In 1900, management of the fair by the State Agricultural Society was superseded by a Board of Agriculture. In 1923, the Iowa General Assembly created the Department of Agriculture, as well as a separate State Fair Board to manage the fair. The Fair Board is the custodian of the fairgrounds and is charged with the management of the annual fair. The Secretary Manager takes direct charge. The law provides that all operating expense, maintenance, shall be paid out of the fair's receipts unless there is a special appropriation made by the legislature. And that is an interesting factor as well. In this day of fundraising, and certainly the Iowa State Fair and its Blue Ribbon Foundation have done a fabulous job of raising money from both the legislature and from both of the people who live here, so that when you go to the fair, there's always a way for you to contribute to fundraising for the future. And that really is something also to be quite proud of. A little bit about individual fairs of the time. Horse racing had become an established institution about 1900. A lot of people didn't want a sporting event to take place at the fair, but it was such a popular attraction that it won out, and it overcame overcame the fact that people wanted to see horse racing at the fair. The New Prosperity era, 1902 to 1908, became the time for special thrill events. In 1906, it is said that men refused to believe their eyes and children stood in amazement while an airship winged its way from the state fairgrounds to the Capitol and back again. Right biplanes were demonstrated each day of the fair in 1911. Other attractions: high diving horses, wire walking, eye-popping spectacles included a transfer from an auto to an airplane. In 1921, a second staged automotive collision. The first took place in 1896 the third in 1932, and a visit in 1927 by both Lindbergh and Chamberlain, fresh from their aviation conquests of the Atlantic Ocean. The destruction of Pompeii and the fall of Troy were reenacted in dazzling fireworks. I'm so sorry I wasn't around for that kind of a show, but that was a big attraction in those early fairs, and it had to be just amazing. It really did. And you know, I love those collisions between the locomotives. I think one year they had 41 ton, another year they had 112 ton locomotives. You know, they would get on the track, aimed at each other, and slam. And the sight must have been amazing. I didn't get to see one, but if you think a little, you know, people now who think that a rock show is a big deal, rock music show is a big deal, never saw the collision of two huge locomotives. Other thrill spectaculars included a biplane pilot in a hair-raising race with an automobile. Don't you love the sound of that? That was something that would drew the people in. Another flyer, F.F. Frakes by name, deliberately smashed his plane into a burning house on the grandstand infield in a staged event drawing 55,000 spectators. I mean, what more could you want? To go to the fair, bring a picnic lunch in those days, that was heartily recommended, and then see these amazing feats in the grandstand. The Victory Fair in 1919 was the largest fair up to that year and featured the theme, Food Won the War. Because Des Moines hotels could not accommodate the increased number of fairgoers, 100 acres were turned into campgrounds. You know, I have some figures here. They're probably not accurate, because camping at the fairgrounds is such a huge attraction. You know, if you get your name in and you get your spot, oftentimes that spot remains in the family for the next 15, 20 years or more. And so every year you come to the fair, you come to your spot, and you know your neighbors, and you have traditions that you celebrate. It's pretty marvelous. I always thought that I would camp sometime during those 27 years, but you know, I never did. I would leave maybe about 11:30 or midnight, and you just like this idea of getting in your car and racing west. And figuring out which route home was the easiest to do. And a lot of times, I stopped, if you can believe this, I stopped at the grocery store and bought something to eat. Now that's an admission that you probably didn't expect to hear from me today, but you know, the plethora of fare at the fairgrounds, when you were walking through the parking lots to get to your car, just nothing seemed right. So I know I used to go to the supermarket on University Avenue, and you could buy a sandwich and take it home and eat it. Can you believe it? I'm not recommending it to you. The baby health contest, that was a huge and famous contest for many, many years. You'll be surprised at the people who participated in that. I know that Halston, the designer, was a healthy baby of the time. And it was just, again, it was just a huge, huge contest. And I understand that the reason that it ended was the fact that the polio epidemic became too much of an enemy, too much of a threat. So they stopped holding it there. Here we are, the 70th anniversary fair in 1924 included the first pedigreed dog show, and the big attraction was the Tokyo fireworks display. The Diamond Jubilee State Fair in 1929 was the biggest of all up to that time. All previous records in attendance, financial returns, and exhibits were broken. More than 15,000 children donated their nickels and dimes in 1929 to buy an elephant dubbed Baby Mine. she was formally christened on opening day. This performing pachyderm was housed on the fairgrounds for several years, but fair management at the time didn't realize how difficult it was to house an elephant. So they were able, I think, to disengage themselves diplomatically, but that's not what you want, particularly when your favorite elephant became quite crabby, they tell me. The period around the Great Depression was a time of retrenchment for the fair, and the fair recorded its first deficit since 1914. But I wanted to mention in 1932, they actually did film footage for that first movie, State Fair, with Will Rogers and the happy adventures of the farm family who came in to try their luck at winning something at the fair. The fair became a wartime casualty in 1942 when the board turned all of its fireproof buildings over to the military to be used as a supply depot. So for 5 years then, there was no Iowa State Fair. Interestingly, there wasn't a fair for those 5 years, and there's another 6th year that the fair wasn't held, mainly because I think it was in 1832, but it was when the World's Fair was in Omaha. And the fair itself didn't think they could stand, that they could not beat the attraction of that World's Fair. But the fair came roaring back in 1946, celebrating the farm families, all the families of all the soldiers who had been gone to fight. The Farm Family Contest, which was designed to honor veteran farm families, was held then. Increased interest in the fair led to the expansion to 10 days from 8. The 10-day experiment was an instant success. The 1952 swine show suffered because of a grave illness for hogs that occurred that year. And guess what? 1959, guess who came along and has never stopped? Bill Riley's talent search. I know that you want to know that, but it's been held all that time since. So that's pretty great. Shuttles, the Clearfield Lions shuttles, happened in 1964, and that is just really, really huge to think they've lasted all that time. So, the themes at the fair, the heritage fairs, remember that, the Indian fairs, and the discoverers, the Italians, and the Gay 90s Fair, and the Roaring 20s. Each year there was a theme that sort of lit up the fair for that year. And they had special entertainment, and special celebration, probably special foods as well, to get people in the mind of another time in the history. Discover Mexico added a new dimension to the fair, emphasizing the culture and customs of other lands. This whole concept of import-export became bigger and bigger and better. Discover Canada, discover Hawaii. You might wonder about Big Name Grandstand. That really was about the 1950s, and that was a very big deal for the fair. That was when they thought about bringing in, I got to keep track of the time here. They thought about bringing in people like Lawrence Welk, who might come for 5 or 6 nights, or Bob Hope, or Red Skelton came. And of course now, the fair is such a mecca for entertainment. The process of coming up with grandstand shows every year is really quite a complicated one. And if you ever think, oh, I'd like to see so-and-so, or I'd like to see so-and-so, I just kind of want to give you a sense of how difficult it is to plan a successful grandstand lineup when it's almost a year away, when you're booking people, or you would like to book people, and who will be still hot when the fair comes around. But it's a huge deal for people. I think Iowans like to know that the fair has big name entertainment. They like to know the big stars are there, even if they don't go themselves. So it's something that they take a great deal of pride in. I remember that Garth Brooks was such a headliner when I was there, and he came 3 times. And the first year that he appeared there was to take the place of another entertainer who had become ill. So he came in to do that. The second year, he came in driving the bus, and his tickets sold out, and that was the next year. He came back a 3rd time, and the office put together a pool, and all the tickets, would have been about 12,000 seats at that time, were sold out in 19 minutes. So that was a huge thing as well. And I remember because I won the pool that year. Jim Taylor became manager of the fair in 1977. He was there, and his call to fame was really getting the fair back on an even financial keel, because things had been a little bit rocky. One year we were in the black, one year in the red, that kind of thing. So he was the first fair manager that I worked with, and so I remember clearly what that meant to us to be in the black continually. I wanted to mention too that the State Fair Museum, I hope you all go there with your interest, included the State Fair Museum. And there's also a second museum up on the hill now that you probably get a chance to go to as well. I love those. I volunteered in that fair, in that museum for quite a lot of time. A little bit of things just to say about the fair in general. Think about it. At the beginning, it was a simple agrarian showcase of stock and grains, a get-together for families scattered over the prairie. Farmers exchanged experiences, discussed breeds of animals, types of grain, the newest inventions, rotation systems, and competed for ribbons for meritorious exertion, as an early fair official called it. Entertainment reflected participants' daily activities, the pulling contests, and the famous plowing matches. I always love that too, that the plowing matches, one year the prize was awarded to the slowest plower on the principle that it is vastly more important that the plowing be well done than that it be done speedily. So you see, you have always got something to be proud of at the Iowa State Fair. Think of the agriculture implements that came in and farmers could see and learn what was very new, and you know that's repeated every year now if you will come. The huge farm machinery show and learn what's new. More attention was focused on Iowa's youth in 4-H and FFA. Livestock judging was made more objective by the substitution of expert judges for amateurs. The fair provided the meeting place, the gathering point for Iowans from the 4 corners of the state, an occasion to come together and celebrate mutual well-being. Even more importantly, the fair saluted and celebrates to this day the individual. It recognizes personal achievement and encourages excellence. This emphasis on the individual has played an important role in fostering self-reliance and independent thinking, the traditional hallmarks of the Midwestern farmer. You know, I think I better stop and ask for questions because, you know, I could go on all night and maybe you don't want to. Yes?
Didn't the fair director used to live on the fairgrounds?
He still does. Yeah, he still does.
And the gentleman that you were talking about, the one, that's when you were, who was the one right before him?
Ken Folk.
Okay.
Kenneth Folk,
Ken
yeah.
was the one
He was the promoter.
Okay, he's
And
the one that gave me permission to go ahead and use a metal detector on the fairgrounds as such, and everybody else wondered how I got it done. I just looked around to see who to go to, and as long as I had it in writing for him, I could do anything.
that's great. Go to the top, folks.
Was that house, was that the original farmhouse up there?
No, he lived in what they do. The gas producers built a house, all electric house, and so then that became, after being on display and exhibit for a few years, You know, that was another attraction of the fair, to come to see that house and all the wonderful things like dishwashers and, you know, water flowing out of your refrigerator. Great.
I have two questions.
Okay.
When was the state fair actually held at that west side location? And my second question, when did the corn dog become a symbol of the state fair?
You know, I think the corn dog question just became because it was such an important thing, you know, for people to eat when they came to it. It wasn't any sort of, I mean, the fair did not make it a symbol. The people made it an icon of what it is, what they were going to eat at the fair. Now, you know, dates for the fair when it was held at Greenwood Park, if you will, Browns Park, that had to be, they bought the land and they came to Des Moines searching for it, and while they were looking, it took about 6 years from when they came to Des Moines before they actually could have a fair in 1886 on the new location. And you know, they say that there were 90 buildings went up in that summer, and all of them received a coat of paint, you know, which is another compliment to Iowans and their plan for the fair. So I don't know the dates. You don't know the dates either, do you?
The 2 years here was 1881 and 82.
Okay.
And then they moved to the new, you said 86?
It was the first fair, actually. I think they both built or bought the land in 1885. But then they had to raise all this money for all these amenities and build all these buildings because there wasn't anything. And, you know, there isn't time tonight to go into the architectural relevance in the, you know, the fairgrounds absolutely is a monument to early fair architecture. The agriculture building is an amazing representative of exposition style architecture. Think of the grandstand that went up in 1909 and 1927, and it looks just like a building from the outside. That was all intent and purposes. And then, of course, when it was redone in 1970, I think 1970 might be the year that the Fair Board decided to renovate that. They had to think hard. Did you want to save the grandstand as it was, with one side open to the elements, one side, and you know, where the sun shone down and the rain fell on grandstand performances? But again, the Fair Board felt that it was more important to keep that building as it was meant to be than to perhaps air condition the entire seating area. You know, who will know, but it was a decision made then. Anything else? Pioneer Hall was the original building on the fairgrounds when the fair began in 1886, and they waited till the last to renovate that as well. But you know, the foundations just give way, and they have to start all over again. So not everything can be perfectly, you know, how it was 100 years before. But I do think that the Fair Board takes that very seriously in what to do, how to renovate. Anything else?
I'd just like to add a point of interest. My grandfather's family was involved with registered Hereford cattle, and they lived in South Dakota, and they would get on the train in South Dakota and ride the train all the way to the Iowa State Fairgrounds. And then they would sleep in the barn with the cattle.
Thank you for that, really. That's a marvelous memory of it. But so much of that goes on at the fair, and you would be just, it's why there's so many memories. It's why it's so important that we, you know, keep the fair foremost in our citizen minds, to protect that. And obviously it was a good 27 years for me. But it's also good now that you can think that that there is a summer. I went a long time without a summer, and it is true because obviously that's when it's all done. I always had to laugh. People could never believe we were really there working. I was on the phone with somebody in July, and I said something that made reference to something, and she said, "You mean you're already out there?" Like, just came out 2 weeks before and dusted off the dusted off the grandstand seats and found the oil to cook up the corn dogs. Anything else? Yes.
The barns that are out there, are any of those part of the old homestead?
No, not the barns. Grandfather's barn was on part of that. The home is no longer there. I believe the Fair Board had that removed with little to no publicity. And so it's too bad that it went. It's the same thing if you remembered on the Grand Avenue, the little horse barns. Those were taken down too. In their defense, I'm going to say that things become too expensive, more expensive to try to renovate than to start over and do something again. The Cultural Center, which was a fabulous building. You remember that, where the Women's and Children's Building was and all the good things that went on there? I mean, it was going to cost much more to repair than to start all over again. So that decision was made. It's not easy being, it's not always easy being people who are entrusted with keeping a valuable thing like the fairgrounds in best shape. Anyone else? But the original barns, they went up in 1902 and 1911 and really early. So there's a lot of history and a lot of tradition in the barns that do exist on barn. Yes? Yes?
It seems like I read somewhere that the original first place ribbon was red, and then it was changed to blue later. Is that true? Have you heard that?
Well, I'm just so happy that you know that. I don't know that at all. Let me know.
I might dreamed it. I don't know.
I don't know how that. I think the blue ribbon was always just the epitome of the best. Yeah. Don't we think that? And so I would say that the blue ribbon was the blue ribbon, and then the others were added in the years to come. Because I got a red ribbon once in a fair contest. I mean, I've got that ribbon. I loved it. It was the best. Anyone else? Keep going to the fair. I think it's the 11th through the 21st this year, and they'll be looking for you all. Maybe I'll see you on the grounds. Yes, David.
How long did the little kiddie train last?
Oh my gosh. Well, it lasted. Different trains came and went, and finally, really it was getting to be so dangerous. The track of the train, it went behind the plaza stage, and it's a wonder somebody wasn't killed by the train tumbling by and some little group from what cheer, hanging around the back of the stage. But it's true. So I would be one to suggest that there will be another train someday in its history. But again, think of how many more stands and concession stands and displays that go up every year. And you think that you have, 400 acres is basically what the fairgrounds is. And what, is half of that campgrounds? Well, nobody can hear me now. I was going to say it used to be 150 acres of campgrounds, but I know that they're adding locations every time that they can because it's so popular and people really want to come. So, but I know the number of food concessions has gone up. There's more food all the time, and certainly they try to make the rides more inviting so that people will want to come and see the Midway. And they get pretty glamorous, the bungee jump and all of those scary things that I didn't try. Don't ask me. Yes.
Is the old mill the oldest ride in the place?
It is.
Okay.
And it's that. I wish I knew everything, but the old mill is. There's only like 3 of them left. At what time in the country there were 6 or 7. But again, it almost was blown down, if you remember in your history, and so it had to be rebuilt as it was. But it was a glorious example of somebody who built a ride, and it was a tunnel of love. I don't know how many people think about that anymore, but that was the point of it, and it's still hugely popular. Thank you all for coming. I love it when people show up to hear about the fair.